Hello everybody, good morning, good afternoon. So what we were working on before was linears and nonlinears, and that actually was the end of a unit, and what we were going to start next was a unit on geometry. And this will be really important for us because you're all going to take geometry next year, or most of you will be. So we're going to try to build a really strong foundation. On our first day, we're just going to go over four main terms for us, really the building blocks of geometry. We're going to talk about a point, what that is, how to notate that, a line segment, and array. That's going to be our goal for today, to make sure we're comfortable with all four of these terms because they really make up majority of geometry. You need to be familiar with these. They're like the building blocks for all geometry. So we're going to start with a point. Feel free to pause the video as you're going through. If you want to write down notes, you should be writing notes down as you go. I'm going to be sliding over some definitions, so you can pause to write down what you need to, and then you can listen to the examples that I'll go through and write them down as well. So we're going to start off with a point. So a point is a location. It does not have size or shape, which means it can't really be measured. There's no length to it, and it's represented by a dot. So an example of a point would just be wherever you are. Right here, we can call it point A if we want. When you're notating a point, you always use a capital letter. That way we know we're talking about a point. You could write this as just saying this would be point A. That's our notation for it. You also could have a point on, let's say, the coordinate plane, which would look like on our coordinate plane. Let's say we have the point 3, 2. You could call this maybe point B, and then you would notate it by writing point B, and then you would write 3, 2 after. That's just naming the point, because maybe you'll have more than one point. Maybe you'll have point B here, and then you'll have point C, which is -1, -1. So the point of labeling our points is simply to differentiate between them. We could say we have point B, we have point C. Maybe we'll want to do something with those points. We might want to draw a line through them. We might want to connect a line segment, find the distance between them. That's something you'll do in the future. So right now we'll just focus on our points, our notation. If we're on the coordinate plane, we can give the coordinates as well. So that's what we have for what a point is. Up next, we have a line. So a line is a straight marking that extends in opposite directions with no end. So we've seen lines, we've graphed them, and lines, just like it says here, just like we've seen, they are straight and they go infinitely in both directions. They keep going on forever. That means they're not measurable. We can't get a measurement for this. There's no length to it. It goes on forever. But now, geometrically, when you have a line, we're going to have at least 2 points on the line. Keep in mind, though, this line is made up of infinitely many points. There's points all over this line. It's really just a collection of points that fall on that straight line. But in order to name a line, we're going to need 2 points. So to name this line, we have A and B. We would call it line AB. And the proper notation for this is simply to write A and B. Those are your 2 points on the line. And above those points, you draw a little line with arrows at the end, because the line extends in both directions infinitely. So since we're extending in both directions with no end, we're going to draw that arrow at the end on both sides. That's mainly how you're going to see lines notated. You also could see like a lowercase letter. You could have a random line like this. Maybe you'll have a diagram with a lot of lines, and instead of showing all the points, you might just see like a little L next to it. You would just call that line L. Or you could have line M. and you would just call it line M. That way you know if you're talking about line M, line L. If you have 2 points, you can call it line AB. Make sure you're using the correct notation up here, because it will be different than, let's say, a line segment, where the notation might be a little different. Yep, so that's what we have with lines, made up of infinitely many points going on. And up next, clear our space here. Up next, we have what we call a line segment. So a line segment is part of a line that connects 2 points. And those points, we refer to them as the endpoints of the line segment. So on a line, let's say we have 2 points. We'll go from here to here, and we'll say CD. So we have 2 points on the line, and this line really went on forever. But the segment is just focusing on these 2 points and everything between them. So I'm going to erase what I just drew, but keep in mind that that line, or this segment, is part of that line that goes on in both directions, but it's a segment of the line. So a segment actually is measurable. There's a way to find like the length of this, the distance from C to D. It's like the shortest path between them. That's why, with line segments, you can actually find the distance, which can be really useful. But let's say we're just talking about line segment CD. Our notation for this, very similar to notating a line. You write the CD, those are your endpoints. The points are called endpoints. So you write both of your endpoints, and you write a line above them with no arrows, because we're not going on infinitely. We're stopping at C, we're stopping at D, and we're everything between them. So your line segment notation is right here with your little line above, and that's how you can differentiate between if you're talking about a line or if you're talking about a line segment. And you could have line segments randomly right here. You could also have them on the coordinate plane, just like you can have a line or a point on the coordinate plane. You might have maybe point A, and that's point A was 3, 1, and then you can have point B, we'll say is -2, 2, it's -2, 2, and then you can have line segment. You can either call it line segment AB, or you could call this line segment BA, and you also could call the other one line segment DC. You can go either way. Make sure you have both of your endpoints. Your endpoints are where the line segment ends on both sides. So there's a line segment. Our last term of the day is called a ray. Now a ray in mathematics is a part of a line that has one endpoint and extends with no end in the opposite direction. So it's still part of a line, so we're still thinking of a line, but it's going to be not the whole line, just part of it. So here will be our ray. And we'll do ray GB. Make that a nice G. And this line would go on infinitely in both directions, but a ray is just the special part where you only go on infinitely in one direction, and you have an endpoint at the other. So here's a ray, and to notate a ray, your notation, you're going to use at least 2 of the points you have, and here we only have 2. And I'm going to write GB, and above that you're going to write a line with a little arrow in the direction in which it goes. So the notation for this is actually really important. Your endpoint needs to go first. We're starting at G, and we're going through point B and going infinitely. So this arrow needs to start at G, kind of start with G, and go through B. So we're going to go in that direction. We cannot call this BG. That would not work, because, put that arrow through, BG would mean you started at B, went through G, and went infinitely here. That's what that notation would say. So the notation for a ray is really important. And when you're notating a ray, it's always going to be the endpoint first, whatever point you're going through. So we're going through B and going on. your arrow is always going to go to the right for a ray. An array, just like a line segment, just like a line, can go on infinitely, or sorry, it can be on the coordinate plane, doesn't have to be in random space. So you could actually have points here, and it will go on infinitely in that direction. So we're going to do some examples just to become familiar with them. So the first ones we're going to do, pull these over, we have 6 examples here. And what we're going to do for these is we're going to state what we have lines, rays, and line segments here. We're going to state what they are, and then we're going to properly notate. So we'll say state and notate. So start with number 1. Number 1, you can see that we have 2 endpoints. A and B are both endpoints of this, and where everything between them, we don't go on infinitely at all. So this would be a line segment. Line segments, and we would notate it with our endpoints like this, or we could say line segment BA. That would work as well. Both are good ways to notate. Number 2 here, we have 2 points. We're given 2 points, and notice we go on infinitely in both directions. So this is just a line. Goes on infinitely, and we can call this line CD. Or we could call it, or we can call it line DC. That would be okay as well, because you're going on infinitely in both directions. So that's perfectly fine. Number 3 over here, notice we have 1 endpoint, and we go through point F here and go on infinitely. That's an indicator that we're working with a ray. So this would be a ray. And the ray, remember, you have to start with your endpoint. So it's point E is going through point F. So our notation is going to look like this. That would be ray EF. And you don't have to write, when you're notating, you don't have to write ray. If you write this, that would be read as ray EF. I was just saying what it is, stating what it is. Like here, this would be read as line CD and line DC. You don't have to write the line before. I was just stating what they are. So don't get confused with that. Number 4 here, we have 2 points, and we're going on infinitely in both directions. That means we're working with a line, and we can notate this line either as GH, so line GH would look like this, or we can call it line HG. That would be okay as well, talking about the same line. Both are good. Number 5, we have 1 endpoint, and we're going on infinitely in the other direction through point M. That means we have a ray, and we would call it ray RM. Has to be RM. Start with your endpoint that's going through M, and your notation should have the arrow just in one direction, starting at your endpoint and going through, in this case, M. So ray RM. And lastly, we have 2 endpoints here. So that means we have a line segment. Ooh, ran out of room. And we can call it line segment BF, or we can call it line segment FB, and that is your proper notation for the line segment. So those are just a few examples of being able to recognize these special new terms, the building blocks of geometry. Now I'm going to have us try to construct a few. If I give you notation, can you construct what it should look like, or can you draw whatever term we're talking about? So let's look at, we have 6 more. These will be our last 6 before I say goodbye. So let's say we have this notation here. This would be, and actually for these we're going to, we'll state what they are, and we're going to construct, state and construct, which is a fancy name for draw. We're going to draw what it is. So right here, this would be a line that we're talking about. We know that from the notation up here. So we have line CH, and that means, we don't know much about line CH, we just know that it's a line, and it goes through CH. H. We also could have notated it as line HC, but we were given line CH. Number 2, we have this notation here. Notice no arrows in the notation. That indicates we're talking about a line segment. So a line segment means you are going to have endpoints. Your endpoints are M and A. So line segment MA would look like this. On to number 3. Number 3, notice the notation up here. This would be read as ray GB. We're working with a ray. And the notation is very important. We're starting at point G and going through B. So again, we don't know what direction it's really going in, but let's say we go like this. We go through G, or from G through B. This would be line or ray GB. And it doesn't necessarily have to go from left to right. It could go from right to left, but you'd have to start at G and go through B. We'll do that if we have another ray. Here we have line segments, AT, segment. That's our notation up here. So that means we have A and T. And let's do it like this time. Line segment AT. Doesn't necessarily have to go from left to right when you're drawing it. We don't know the direction of them. We're not given coordinates for the endpoints, but we know it's a segment between A and T. Number 5, looks like we're working with another ray with endpoint R. So we're working with a ray. We're starting, let's say point R is over here, and we're going to go through point T we'll throw up here. So you're starting with an endpoint at R, going through T infinitely, and it's straight. All of these should be straight because they're parts of a line, or they are a line. So we're starting at R, straight through T, and we go on infinitely. And now number 6, last but not least, we have a line, and it's line KC. So let's say this is point K, this is point C. If we're line KC, we're going straight through both of those and have arrows on the both ends because we go on infinitely in both directions. And that's all we have. So on Classroom, on this post, there should be some practice docs for you, just to practice drawing or constructing different line segments, rays, and lines. Also, I'll have some diagrams with rays, lines, line segments, and have you correctly name them, just to make sure you're comfortable. If you're not comfortable with plotting points, we're going to need to know how to do that a lot with geometry. So I'll attach an iExcel that'll help you practice plotting points on the coordinate plane if you're given coordinates. So that's something we have been doing a lot of, but if you're still feeling a little iffy, then by all means you're going to want to practice and make sure you're comfortable. Alright guys, hope you're having fun and enjoying math. I'll talk to you soon. Have a good day.